When Daniel Rhodes first drove through the wrought iron gates of Silverwood Estates, he felt the weight of success settling on his shoulders. The neighborhood shimmered in the golden morning light, marble fountains, manicured hedges, and glass front mansions lined in perfect symmetry. It looked like a place where nothing bad could ever happen, a paradise, frozen in time. For Daniel, after years of corporate grind and lonely nights, this was supposed to be his reward: peace, pride, and a clean slate. Every corner of Silverwood spoke of wealth and control. Lawns looked cloned from glossy magazines, and even the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and money. But beneath that perfection lurked a quiet tension, the kind that made smiles too tight and compliments sound rehearsed. Daniel didn't see it yet. He only saw beauty, not the cage beneath it. At the center of that gilded order was the Silverwood Homeowners Association, ruled by the infamous Victoria Hale. Her reputation preceded her, elegant, graceful, and ruthless in the same breath. To the residents, she was the queen of Silverwood, the keeper of its image. People said she could crush someone's reputation with a single HOA memo, and Daniel would soon find out they weren't exaggerating. On his first week, Victoria appeared at his doorstep. She wore pearls, carried a leather-bound folder, and smiled with a precision that seemed practiced. "Welcome to Silverwood, Mr. Rhodes," she said softly. "I do hope you've read the covenant thoroughly. We take community standards very seriously here." Her eyes flicked to the paint samples leaning by his porch. "Oh, you're repainting? Please submit your color choice for approval first. We've had unpleasant incidents before." Daniel laughed lightly, thinking she was being dramatic. But Victoria's polite smile didn't waver, and her words left a chill in the air. He didn't know it then, but Silverwood's version of perfection came with invisible chains. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began to notice how strange the neighborhood really was. At night, small groups gathered by the clubhouse, whispering and glancing toward certain houses. Those who praised Victoria loudly seemed to get away with anything. Unapproved renovations, late fees ignored, parties that broke every rule. But others, the ones who didn't bow low enough, became targets of endless scrutiny. The Ramirez family across the street was one of them. They had once questioned a mysterious HOA beautification fee, and since then, it was as if they'd been marked. Their mailbox was deemed non-compliant. Their grass was measured weekly for length violations. Even their Christmas lights were cited as excessive. Daniel watched them slowly shrink into silence. Silverwood wasn't a community. It was a hierarchy. The more he observed, the clearer it became. The HOA didn't enforce order. It enforced obedience. Victoria's charm was only the mask that hid her control. She ran Silverwood like a private kingdom, one where submission was the price of peace. Then came Daniel's first real clash. For his mother's birthday, he built a small wooden pergola in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just a cozy place for dinner. 2 days later, a white envelope appeared on his doorstep, embossed with the HOA seal. HOA violation, year 127. Unauthorized structure. Daily fines of $250 until removal. Daniel couldn't believe it. He had barely finished construction. He tried calling the HOA office, but nobody returned his messages. When he finally reached Victoria, her tone was sugary and distant. "Oh, Daniel," she sighed. "I wish you'd consulted the board first. We must maintain architectural harmony. But perhaps, if you attend our next community gala, we can revisit this matter. It's always easier to resolve issues in person, don't you think?" It sounded like an offer, but beneath the politeness, Daniel heard something else, a test. The night of the gala, Silverwood glimmered under chandeliers and champagne light. Everyone dressed like royalty. The air buzzed with laughter that felt rehearsed, as if the whole room was performing for one woman, Victoria Hale. Daniel wandered among them, listening to hollow small talk about golf memberships and vacation homes. The same people who bragged about their charity donations whispered about neighbors who'd fallen out of favor. Every glance carried a story, and every story carried fear. Near the end of the night, Daniel noticed a small circle near the bar, Victoria and several HOA board members speaking in low voices. Papers exchanged hands, followed by discreet envelopes. Daniel moved closer, pretending to pour a drink, and caught a glimpse of a page. Silverwood Beautification Fund. Donation acknowledgement. But what caught his eye wasn't the title. It was the handwritten note beneath. Approval granted. Pending contribution. His stomach tightened. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a system. One that rewarded obedience with privilege and punished independence with ruin. And Daniel, without realizing it, had just stepped into the middle of Silverwood's best-kept secret. After the gala, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about what he saw. That handwritten note, the quiet exchange of envelopes, and the way Victoria's smile never faltered as she moved between her board members. It didn't sit right with him. The beautification fund was supposed to be a community project, yet everything about it smelled like a bribe. Days later, he started asking questions. He stopped by the HOA office, a sleek glass building near the gate, too luxurious for a nonprofit committee. Behind the desk sat Mara, the assistant, typing as if her job depended on pretending not to see him. When Daniel asked for copies of the HOA's financial records, her fingers froze. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rhodes," she said softly. "Those documents are confidential. Only board members have access." Daniel frowned. "Even though they're funded by homeowners' fees?" She looked up, uneasy. "I'm just following Mrs. Hale's instructions." Her voice trembled ever so slightly, fear disguised as professionalism. Daniel didn't push her, but he walked out knowing one thing. Something was being hidden in plain sight. That night, he sat on his patio, staring at the letter from the HOA about his pergola fines, now totaling nearly $3,000. He realized what Victoria's invitation to the gala really was. It wasn't social outreach. It was a chance to buy his way into her circle. But Daniel wasn't wired that way. He'd fought too hard to build his life honestly. He wasn't going to bend for anyone, especially not an HOA queen who ruled with fear and favoritism. The next morning, he decided to attend the next open board meeting, which, as he discovered, was only open in name. When he arrived, he found a semicircle of residents sitting quietly as the board members, 5 people in suits, discussed landscaping budgets and community image policies. Victoria presided over it like a judge in a marble court. When the floor opened for questions, Daniel stood. "I'd like to request a review of the Beautification Fund's spending records," he said calmly. "As homeowners, we have a right to know where our money goes." The room went silent. Victoria didn't look up right away. When she finally did, her expression was a perfect mask of grace. "Mr. Rhodes," she said with an icy smile, "you're new here. Perhaps you don't yet understand how much trust is required to maintain Silverwood's harmony. Our finances are handled with transparency, among those qualified to interpret them. Do you have any background in community administration?" It was a power move, a public belittling disguised as a polite question. The audience murmured. Daniel clenched his jaw but stayed composed. "No, but I do have a background in accounting," he replied evenly. "So I know when numbers don't add up." A flicker of irritation passed over her face. "Noted," she said coolly. Meeting adjourned. The gavel struck, and with it, Daniel knew he'd just been marked. The retaliation came quietly at first. A week later, a new violation notice appeared. Improper waste bin storage, a $150 fine. Then another, unapproved garden fixture. Within 10 days, his mailbox was filled with citations, each more absurd than the last. When he asked neighbors about it, they whispered warnings instead of advice. "Don't fight her," said one man, a lawyer named Graham. "She'll bury you in legal fees. Just pay and stay invisible." Another neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, glanced around before whispering, "They did the same to us. The beautification fund is just a cover. People donate to make their fines disappear." Daniel's stomach turned. It was worse than corruption. It was extortion dressed in designer heels. Determined to get proof, Daniel started digging deeper. He went jogging every morning near the clubhouse, noting who entered after hours. He saw Victoria meeting with local contractors, sometimes leaving with folders or small boxes. One night, just past midnight, he saw lights in the HOA office. He drove closer and parked across the street. Through the glass, he spotted Victoria with two board members, standing around a table scattered with cash envelopes. One of them was laughing, counting bills. Victoria didn't laugh. She just nodded. Daniel's phone trembled in his hand as he recorded a short video through the window. He couldn't hear their words, but the image was damning. HOA leaders exchanging money under the cover of night. The next morning, he sent an anonymous email to a few residents with a blurred still from the footage and the message, "Is this where our HOA fees go?" Within hours, the entire community was buzzing. Silverwood's gossip chain was faster than wildfire. Daniel watched from his window as neighbors whispered in driveways, as rumors spread like smoke. By afternoon, the HOA sent out a statement claiming the image was taken out of context. A charitable donation count, they said. But Daniel could feel the tension in the air. For the first time, Victoria's iron grip was slipping. That night, as Daniel sat in his kitchen reviewing the video again, his phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Rhodes," a familiar voice purred. "It seems you've been busy." It was Victoria. Her tone was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "You should be careful about what you share. Misunderstandings can have consequences, for everyone involved." Daniel took a breath. "Is that a threat?" "A reminder," she said softly. "Silverwood values privacy. I'd hate for your mother's lovely pergola to become problematic again." The line clicked dead. For the first time, Daniel felt genuine fear. He realized this wasn't just an HOA dispute. It was a social machine designed to crush dissent and protect its image at any cost. But he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. The whispers in Silverwood were growing louder, the masks beginning to slip. Victoria Hale had ruled this neighborhood for years through charm and intimidation. But Daniel had just lit a fuse under her empire of silence, and Silverwood was about to explode. The next few days in Silverwood Estates felt like walking through a storm about to break. Neighbors who once smiled politely now exchanged wary glances in the streets. The whispers had turned into arguments, and the air, once filled with the hum of sprinklers and golf carts, carried tension thick enough to choke on. Daniel knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't step back from. The anonymous photo had cracked the perfect facade of Silverwood, and now people were starting to ask questions Victoria could no longer control. But he also knew how dangerous she was when cornered. Her power didn't just come from rules, it came from fear, and fear didn't vanish overnight. One morning, as Daniel left for work, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. It had tinted windows, engine idling. No one got out. That same day, his mailbox was ripped off its post and tossed into his driveway. Then came the letter, not from the HOA, but from a law firm representing them, accusing him of defamation and breach of community trust. They wanted him silenced, but by now, Daniel wasn't alone. The Ramirez family reached out, along with several other homeowners who had faced unexplained fines and suspicious HOA actions. They met quietly in Daniel's garage one evening, the air thick with determination and quiet anger. On the workbench lay a folder full of screenshots, letters, and documents. Every shady violation, every questionable donation, and the blurry video that started it all. "This isn't just about Silverwood," Daniel said, his voice steady. "It's about how people like her think they can buy silence. We end that here." A week later, Victoria announced an emergency HOA meeting, mandatory attendance for all residents. Her message promised clarity about the rumors, but Daniel knew it was damage control. He came prepared, laptop under his arm, files neatly arranged, and his phone set to record. The meeting was held in the clubhouse ballroom, the same one that had once glittered with laughter and champagne. Now, it was filled with wary eyes and hushed voices. Victoria stood at the front, perfectly dressed as always, but there was something new in her posture. A tightness around her jaw, a spark of panic behind her calm. "My friends," she began, her voice soft yet commanding. "We've all heard the lies circulating about our beloved community. I assure you, Every dollar of the beautification fund has been used with integrity. The images and accusations being shared are malicious fabrications. She smiled faintly. And I believe we all know who started them. All eyes turned to Daniel. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then Daniel stepped forward. If they're lies, he said calmly, then you won't mind if we all look at the facts. He placed his laptop on the projector table and clicked play. The video appeared on the large screen. Victoria and her board, caught under harsh fluorescent light, counting cash. Gasps rippled through the room. Then came the documents. HOA payments routed through private accounts, unexplained expenses labeled as gifts, and names of residents whose fines had vanished after their donations. Victoria's expression never fully broke, but her eyes flickered with rage. This is an invasion of privacy, she said sharply. Taken out of context, doctored. Then explain the missing $78,000, Daniel interrupted. Explain why residents like the Ramirez's were fined for garden lights while others built full extensions with no approval. Explain why you asked me to resolve things in person at your gala. The room erupted. Questions, accusations, shouting, years of fear finally spilling over. Victoria tried to regain control, but the mask had shattered. A board member, red-faced and sweating, suddenly stood up. This isn't my fault, he blurted. She told us it was part of community maintenance. I didn't know about the kickbacks. It was over. Within days, the county auditors were involved. The HOA office was raided for financial review. Residents shared their stories publicly. Some even contacted local media. The once untouchable Queen of Silverwood became the face of a suburban scandal that trended across the state. Victoria Hale resigned before the investigation concluded, leaving the neighborhood in silence. The fountain still sparkled, the lawn still perfect, but the illusion of harmony was gone. The masks had been stripped away, and beneath them lay something raw. The realization that Silverwood's beauty had always been built on fear. Weeks later, Daniel stood on his back patio beneath the same wooden pergola that had started it all. The fines were gone, the threats had stopped, and the HOA had been replaced by a temporary resident committee, one that actually listened. For the first time, Silverwood felt like a neighborhood instead of a stage. Mrs. Ramirez stopped by with a smile and a pie, something no one had done for him since moving in. You know, she said warmly, you might have just saved this place. Daniel smiled faintly, glancing at the manicured lawns glowing under the sunset. Maybe, he said, or maybe we just tore down the curtain. In the distance, the fountains of Silverwood kept running, crystal clear and endlessly looping, symbols of perfection that could no longer hide the truth.